Welcome to Paranormal M, where each tale is darker than the last. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for all our latest ghostly adventures. Enjoy the thrills that await. My Nana's house has something evil in it. I lived with my Nana for the majority of my childhood. Our house is about 150 years old, give or take. The upstairs consisted of a big room, used as my bedroom. It's connected to like another bedroom and my parents' room, a bathroom connected to my room, and an attic door. Like actually a door. The attic was a room connected to mine. In the attic there were 2 secret rooms which I've never been in. It was just known that they're there. So there's been plenty of paranormal things that have happened at my Nana's house. I'm almost 16 now. When I was about 14, or actually even earlier when I was like 4, I was playing hide and seek with my uncle. He was about 11. My uncle's friend and 3 of my friends, my uncle's friend's sisters. In my room I had a cot for a bed, so it was able to be folded in half and I chose to hide in it. My uncle came and looked around upstairs but didn't find me. After a few minutes, so I heard him yell, "Forfeit!" So I came out. I was about to head downstairs when I heard something behind me. When I turned around, I saw 2 or even 3 dark figures walking to the closet. My uncle, I guess, had left it open. A feeling of dread washed over me, and I screamed at the top of my lungs and went to run downstairs. But I fell and I injured my arm. My Nana and parents came running into the foyer to find me laying at the bottom of the stairs sobbing. Upon investigation, the closet door was closed. Me and my parents ended up switching rooms, but I'm still deathly afraid of the upstairs at my Nana's. Another instance, and this is my uncle's story. When he was around 9, him and his mom, my Nana, were sitting on the couch watching TV. That's when he saw a pure black entity going into him in his mom's room. After he flipped out and wouldn't go back in there for months. My aunt must have been about 18, or at least at that point, and coming home with her boyfriend. Through the window, she saw her mom watching the TV. My Nana looked at them, and my aunt explains that the look on her face was pure evil. My aunt turned to go inside, and the TV was off, and her mom was in bed. It had been only a few seconds and not nearly enough time for an older woman to get to her bed so fast and in pajamas and asleep. The last instance is my own story. It happened 2 summers ago when I turned 13. It was about a week after my birthday, and I was going to spend the week with my Nana. I was living with my aunt and her family at this point. My uncle was still living with his mom to take care of her. I hadn't gone into my Nana's room yet because I sleep with her when I come over. I'd been there a few hours and was going to go use the restroom. It's inside my Nana's room down the downstairs bathroom, they're sort of connected. The room was dark, and as I started feeling in like this overwhelming sense of fear, can't exactly remember this moment because I blacked out or something, but I got the rest of the story from my uncle and Nana. I stopped at the doorway and stared for a few moments. Then I just released a blood-boiling scream. My Nana lunged over, turned on the bedroom light, and was shaking and crying. My uncle started saying, "What's wrong? What happened?" My Nana begged me to tell her what I saw, and all I mumbled was, "The dark man." This is what we referred to as the reoccurring dark figure. We sat at the table for hours after that, and noticed that the little pull thing that comes down from the fan was spinning wildly through the fan. It's even off. I have many more stories from this house. One of the neighbors who's lived next to it her whole life has told us so many stories ranging from a young woman who hung herself there to people being stabbed, to even a meth head family who would jump out of the window and beat people in there. There's something in the sky in Springfield, Missouri. I think it's a UFO. I'm going to start this off by saying that I have a video and some photos. You can't see it too well, but I have them, and any mods if they want proof. Tonight, August 4th, 2019 at around 10:15 p.m. My aunt and I were on the porch when my aunt saw something in the sky. It was like an outline of a circle and part of it was gone, kind of like how an eclipse would look at first. We noticed that this was not where the moon usually is. It's usually behind our house. So eclipse and moon are ruled out. The thing was bright yellow and had an orange-red tint to it. It almost looked like a fireball. It's night, the sun's on the other side of the planet at this minute. Thought it was a shooting star at first, but it wasn't moving anywhere. It just started like flattening out, like spreading. Then it started to shrink into a smaller form and kind of looked like a star, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. A few minutes later it suddenly reappeared and got bigger and bigger. It looked as if the moon would have been over the sun and coming off of it. Mind you, the black part was moving towards the way it came in the first time. The light around it kind of spread out again, and suddenly it started getting smaller. Dark part like going back over, I guess. But then it split into two and completely disappeared again. I waited to see if it would come back, but it didn't for a third time. I started doing some searching and I found nothing for solar or lunar eclipses. No meteor showers, no comets, nothing of that sort for tonight. After doing some more searching, 2 other people saw almost the same thing 3 days ago around the same time. My aunt stepped back outside and called me over fast. There was what looked to be like a pretty low plane flying within 2 large wings. Or rather, with 2 large wings. My aunt said it looked like it had 4 wings, like 2 on each side. I'm telling you, it was big. One side was bright red and the other bright green. Planes in our area normally have a small light that flickers on both sides, and it wasn't like this. This plane was coming from the same area we saw this mystery light thing. When the plane got behind our house, I ran to look at it. Couldn't see it at all, and it was big. Doesn't seem like it would have been out of view. Mao and I have been trying to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing makes sense at all. I don't want to claim aliens without some other people's opinions first. Haunted Church. Before getting started, I want to give you a brief backstory on me, the town, and the church that I grew up in, so you can better understand the situation. I come from a small town in northern Minnesota, where everybody literally knows everybody. Growing up, I attended the same Lutheran church that my family's attended for generations, since before the structure was brought from the country into town in the 1940s. I know every corner and sound in that church. Might as well have lived there while growing up. I know a lot of the history, but unfortunately not enough to answer some of the questions I have about who's haunting it. For my family and I, this started in 2012. The pastor was taking a vacation since he was struggling with depression, had just recruited me to take up the job of typing, printing, folding, and distributing bulletins to our church and our sister church in the country. My father, brother, and sister would also and pretty often help with the tasks of printing and folding. Since we're so bad about procrastinating, this usually happened at the last minute later on Saturday night. One day when we were all on our way to church to work on the bulletins, my dad and brother were telling my sister and I about what had happened to them on 2 separate occasions weeks before. My dad is a deacon for the church and had kind of brought my brother along late on these Saturday nights. Like last minute, as was pretty much our custom. That was to help him set up for the communion the next Sundays. Now, the church used to have this old rotary phone for decades, before somebody finally decided to upgrade to a newer model in maybe 2010. The phone's in our basement, right outside the door of the kitchen. And outside that kitchen, there's a larger room with a bunch of tables for when we have a potluck or an adult Sunday school. My dad and brother were in the area with the tables, not far from the kitchen, when they heard the old rotary phone start to ring. And if you're old enough, you remember that those phones made more of a brrrring sort of sound. Much different from the phones they have now. My dad didn't pick up because A, he was in no mood to talk to anybody on the phone, and B, who calls a church that late in the evening when no one's likely to be there? You can find the pastor's number in the phone book. And C, Dad knew that they had a new phone that didn't ring like that. So they kept working. But the rotary phone that wasn't there anymore kept ringing from the same wall which it used to hang. The second Saturday, my dad and brother were there at least. They were in the basement again. They're working on communion when they hear steady, heavy footsteps. They're walking up and down the aisle between the pews upstairs. The actual chapel is right above where the basement is. And those footsteps didn't stop. They kind of didn't step up where the altar is. They didn't even come out of the chapel. Just steadily walked back and forth up and down the aisle for the whole period of time they were there. They would have known if somebody else was in the church. They'd already been in the altar to collect the items needed for communion. Any of the doors leading to the church aren't far, and if somebody had come in, they would have said hello, so they wouldn't spook my dad or brother. Fast forward a few weeks to us working on the bulletins in the basement. I had been a little spooked by what had happened and kind of pissed that they'd told my mom and sister any sooner, but we finished folding and counting the bulletins, and Dad had found an old photo album under the desk. It's the desk that the printer sits on when we hear those steady, heavy footsteps again. This time they're coming from the staircase that leads from the altar into the kitchen, just across the basement from us. We couldn't see the actual stairs, but it was obvious that somebody was walking and wouldn't pause at all, even to turn around and go back up or down the steps. My siblings and I were shitting our pants and trying to talk my dad into maybe looking at the photo album another time, when some spirit or something was walking up and down the staircase not 30 feet away from us. This was my first real experience with the paranormal. I'd watched TV shows and stuff about it to be done with friends when I was a kid, and you'd think that you'll be so brave if that sort of thing actually happens to you someday. But it is freaky as all hell. Wanted to go look up those stairs, but I just couldn't bring myself to do so. I still wish I could have, but I still remember how scary I was. The old math teacher had gone up to the same church and told her my dad got along pretty well, since they're both actual geniuses and math junkies. A few months after the staircase thing happened, my dad said he was talking with her after church when he brought up, what had happened to us. She played piano for the Sunday school and would sometimes stay late to organize and practice for Sunday. She said that one night when she was there, she was sitting up by the altar. She was actually at the piano, which is actually in front of the stairs where we had heard their footsteps, but she too heard steady, heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs leading to the balcony, which is the area of the church that overlooks everything else. Since she's a teacher and thought maybe some kids were playing a prank on her, she called out and she knew it was just them being dumb. It didn't stop, so she got up and went over to look up the steps. Upon looking, the steps stopped and there was no one there who could have been making them. But keep in mind, she was a very logical thinker. She was the kind of person that wouldn't have lied about anything like this. I'm pretty sure my dad and maybe her husband are the only people that she's told. I originally had thought that the haunting might be residual, because it was basically just sounds from things or people from the past. But I'm questioning that because the footsteps occur in different places. And since then, if I've ever had to go into that church after 8, I've always been really on guard. I don't think it's anything bad. I think it just sounds like some spirit's confused or something. It takes place in the basement as well, which is obviously an add-on after the church has moved into town, which leads me to believe that whoever it is, they came after the big move. Double homicide in my living room. Around January of 2016, my dad moved into a new home following his divorce with my mom. As we were unpacking boxes, he was singing. I noticed something singing back to him near the back of the house where the bathrooms are. When he looked around to see if anybody was in his house, it was empty, of course. Small sounds and occurrences like this continued to happen for a few months. One night, my dad and I were both in our room sleeping. That's when I heard a cluster of voices coming from the hallway. My dad always kept his bedroom door open at night because we have a dog. He usually also kept the TV on, so I figured it was like dialogue from a TV program. The next morning, my dad asked me if I heard voices in the night. He explained that he could hear them, and they were clearly speaking English, but I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying. I had heard the same thing. Around Christmas of the same year, my dad had set up a small tree with presents underneath it. We had gone to bed, and in the morning all the presents were moved from under the tree into the living room at the front of the house. Our groceries were constantly being tampered with, and we could hear them rustling through the bags and looking at what we had bought. Small things in mine like hair clips and accessories were just constantly being misplaced and replaced in their original spot. After a few months of this, my dad found an article from 2013 regarding a gang-related double homicide at this exact address. Wow. A man had come to the house, shot 2 men in the front room while their children were in the home. The man was apprehended. He was murdered in jail. Ever since then, the noises that we hear, they don't bother us as much anymore. Still a little bit creepy, especially since no one disclosed the homicide when my dad initially bought the house. I asked one of her neighbors about it, but she didn't like talking about it. She told me that I shouldn't look into it further. I remember her distinctly telling me not to dig around because it can upset the spirits in the house. I don't know about you guys, but if I heard about a double homicide in my house, I would have to dig a little bit further. My grandmother visits me after her death. I've always believed in spirits and energy. As a child, and even in my early teens, I had many strange paranormal experiences that I kept to myself for fear that no one would believe me. One of these experiences happened shortly after my grandmother passed away when I was 7 years old. My grandmother had been sick my whole life. I always had a sense that she wouldn't be around for long. On the night of her death, I was staying at a friend's house. I had a horrible dream that she had passed. When I woke up, I distinctly remember feeling that something wasn't right. As soon as I got home, my parents told me that she had died. I remember as a child having to process the fact that I knew that she was gone before anybody else did. I felt there must be something wrong with me because these sort of things didn't happen. The whole situation bothered me for weeks. I remember lying in bed, just unable to sleep despite being exhausted. Being a child, all I knew was to pray. Close my eyes and ask God to let me go to sleep and stop thinking about my grandmother. I knew she was gone and there was nothing I could do. I immediately felt at peace. It was until I realized somebody was standing over my bed watching me. I opened my eyes and saw what I can only describe as an angel. The person was neither masculine nor feminine, just a person with a gentle face and expression. The person didn't speak to me, but wanted me to know that they were there to keep me safe. I suppose God could have sent me down an angel to watch over me and help me sleep. I've also been told that loved ones who passed away can send down angels to comfort those they left behind. But either way, I know what I saw and how it made me feel. Since then, I've never encountered the angel person again. I have, however, seen mediums who've told me that my grandmother watches over me and takes responsibility for me on the other side. Little things happen here and there that make me feel that this is true. There are times when I feel as though I'm not alone, even in an empty room. I think of her often. It's a comfort to me to believe that she's out there. My mom was dead for several minutes. When she just turned 18, my mom was hit by a city truck. It had run a red light. Her collarbone was crushed. She had slammed her head against the window so hard that the paramedics declared her dead at the scene. Despite being revived in the ambulance, her parents were called and told that she had died. The local news station also reported the incident as having killed her. When she arrived at the hospital, she was alive but unconscious. She remained in a coma for several weeks before waking up in a confused state. At the time, she couldn't remember what had happened to her in the moments leading up to the incident, nor could she recall anything from her comatose state. Her mother was sent to a rehabilitation center previously used as a tuberculosis ward in the 60s. While there, she was horribly mistreated by hospital staff, even recalls being molested and watched while taking showers. I'm a firm believer in the idea that some people, in order to heal from traumatic events, choose not to remember them at all. Yeah, definitely true. I also believed up until recently that this was the coping mechanism my mom used to overcome the trauma surrounding her incident. However, recently my mom started seeing a therapist in an attempt to unlock the memories of an event in order to, for her to heal from them further. She called me a couple of nights ago waking from a dream in which she could recall her comatose state. The following is what she told me she can remember. She told me that she remembers hearing people's voices around her, parents crying and my father staying by her side the entire time. She remembers hearing many voices all the time and being unable to respond to them. She remembers feeling trapped in her body, unable to move or tell anybody what was going on. She says that she can remember waking up and still feeling trapped for a long time while her body began to adjust to life again. She told me it was the most painful, miserable experience of her life. That she was so grateful that she could remember it because she'd always been racking her brain for those memories that she knew that she had. Moral of the story: if somebody you care about is in a coma, talk to them. Even if you know they can't respond, the sound of your voice will kind of calm them. Let them know that you're there. Unwitting cell phone spirit channeling. Even as a kid, I've always had an interest in the paranormal, the weird. It's an interest that has followed me into my adult life, sometimes to startling effect. Before I can begin, I will say that I'd always believed in ghosts and things of that ilk. Yet at the same time, there'd been some skepticism, mostly because prior to these circumstances about which I'm going to tell you, I hadn't experienced anything concrete, for lack of a better word. And so without further ado, let's dive in. 5 or 6 years ago, 2 female friends, Ashley and Lindsay, they were sitting on Lindsay's bed, shooting the shit and whatnot, not in the slightest prepared for what was about to transpire. At the time, I had known Lindsay for a few years. Ashley had been recently indoctrinated into our little clan of friends. Anyway, one of us, I can't remember who, was in the middle of the sentence when out of the blue, Lindsay's cell phone rang. She looked at her phone, and after a few seconds she exclaimed, "The president? Hey, you guys, the president's calling me." Thinking nothing of it at the time, I took her phone, which was still ringing, and looked at the screen. If you have somebody saved in your contacts when they call you, contact number is displayed above the phone number, and in this case it was a weird number I'd never seen before, weird area code and all that jazz. Above said number it did indeed say, "The President." Her ringtone cut off and the call ended. "Do you have somebody saved in your contacts under that name?" I asked, to which she replied, "No, I don't think so. Hang on, let me check." She checked, and there was no one on the contact list under the president, so it's pretty weird. Not a minute went by, and we were still puzzling over this when the phone rang again. Again above the phone number was the president, so I answered it. Or rather, I told her, answer it. And she did so. Blank line. Called the number back. Zilp, zip, nada. Feeling pretty weirded out and swept by a vague undercurrent of unease, yet curious, I said out loud, seemingly to the air, "Okay, Mr. President, who's sitting to my left?" A minute or so went by, and then again the phone rang. Only this time, instead of saying the president, it said Ashley. And she was sitting to my left. This went on for some time, both that night and other nights for a year or more. At one point at the party down the street, it told me that it was my grandma, who at the time had recently passed. I remember breaking into tears right then and there. Once a few weeks later at the local dive bar, I was just smoking on the porch, I'd asked the phone. I'd asked the spirit communicating through the phone what the afterlife was like. It's heaven, honey. After a while, it had become so commonplace that eventually the novelty of the ordeal died down. That was when things took a turn for the worst. It began to threaten us for ignoring it, saying that it would kill us. At one juncture, sitting around a bonfire, a cartoon image of a skeleton showed up on her screen during one of these aforementioned calls, complete with a yellow flashing background. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, it stopped. Still have difficulties wrapping my head around it. I have numerous witnesses, from people at the bar to the two whom I'd first experienced it with, along with a few hangers who were still interested. And yet through it all, some skepticism remains. Uncomfortable comfort room. So just to give you guys an idea of what my setup looks like, it started when I was playing CSGO on my PC downstairs. I don't have my own room. My two younger brothers and parents sleep in the same room, so we just have a separated bed, and my PC is actually under the stairs, and my PC is just a few steps away from our comfort room. It was around 4 a.m. when I finished playing CSGO. That's when I started to feel like pissing. Never actually played CSGO that long because I don't like my parents seeing me play and thinking that I didn't sleep. So I decided that it was late and I should go sleep before my parents wake up. I went to our CR, and as I began pissing, I suddenly felt someone was behind me. It didn't immediately send chills down my spine, nor giving me goosebumps, but I just thought that maybe it was just my imagination. Being a skeptical person, but here's the crazy part. This thing, it's just like a heavy sigh on my nape. It was like, ah. You can actually feel the air and the sound it makes, and it's more terrifying. But to be honest, I wanted to look around, but just thought I shouldn't be being a skeptical person. I thought maybe it was my pee making that sound as it hit the ceramic. So I decided to get a glass of water and to pour it down the toilet. Then it did make the same sound. That's not when I started to freak out. The chills that I had were so intense that I actually could feel myself getting tired all of a sudden. After realizing what happened, I ran upstairs and just slept it off, thinking that maybe I was just imagining things. Having once been a child, I will tell you that pouring a cup of water sounds nothing like taking a pee. Moving on. Shadow of a floating dress. It started as the usual night that you always have. It always did. So it was the summer of 2017 here in the Philippines. And us Filipinos, if you don't know, we have so many beliefs. It's like woven into our culture. We believe in certain things that other people don't. But me? Not me. I'm skeptical about these things. So here's what happened. We had a store in our front, and it had a metal roll-up because we sell rice. That was the time where my cousin, who's older than me, stayed at our house. My mom hired him to sell the rice. Every night we slept on the living room because our room upstairs isn't that big of a room. So we improvised on making a bed, so we lay some mattress in our living room so we can actually be comfortable sleeping, even though we're sleeping on the floor. This summer night was different from the summer night that I usually have. My cousin went back to their house to spend the night there, and I was actually going to sleep alone in our living room, but being a skeptical person, I'm not that intrigued that I'm actually sleeping alone. Mainly because why would I be scared of our own house? I've been living here since I was 4 years old, and I was already 21 at that time. So midnight came. I think it was around 1 or 2, and I felt like sleeping. Okay, I'll give you guys an idea of what our house looks like. It was a 2-story house. We have our stairs in the middle of the house, in which it divided our living room from our kitchen and dining room. Not much of a room, really. So if you stand by the living room, you could actually see a part of our kitchen. I mentioned that we had like a store and our roll-up was close. so I can't blame it if it's the wind that's going to cause this experience. So there I was about to sleep when I decided to turn off the light in the living room because, well, our house is small, I can leave the light in our kitchen open, so it's not that dark. And then upon lying down, I picked up my phone to set an alarm, and while I'm setting my alarm, there's this slowly moving shadow of a dress floating in our kitchen. I saw its shadow on our tiles because the light was on, and it reflected to the point where it was so visible it went to the CR before it totally disappeared. I immediately stood up out of shock because of what I saw. I stood up, I investigated our kitchen without moving closer. I looked if there was a cloth hanging in the middle of our kitchen that can cast that shadow. But nope, there's not a single thing nor piece of cloth that's placed in the middle of our kitchen. Comfort room. Not familiar with that. But yes, I put the two and two together. My ghost experience in the Army. I remember when I was in holding after completing my basic training. I lived in a little barrack block with 3 other people. We shared a common room and bathroom. It was this other room called the plant room, which had like a hot water heater and like cleaning supplies, and there was like a hole in the roof that we started experiencing weird things about the door. Like it would just be wide open after we would come back from the gym or work, and shortly after we experienced it. I'm gonna brace myself because there's no periods. Excuse me. So there's a hole in the roof in this room, and there's weird things about the door, apparently. Okay, so the door would be wide open after they got back from the gym. They'd experienced it opening by itself in front of all of them, which was disturbing. Kind of creeped them out after a few weeks. 2 of the other guys, they left and they went to visit their families for the weekend. And there was a guy called Mossy. Mossy and myself left for the weekend. And the Saturday night, I was in my room on the laptop listening to music. The new Travis Scott album just came out. He sent me a message saying, "Did you hear that?" And I replied, "No." He said, "The ghost door is slamming." I said, "I can't hear it. Just ignore it and hopefully it'll stop." To be honest, I was just kind of pretending not to be scared because I really was. A few minutes go by and I heard a loud slam. And instantly Mossy messages me. Said, "You hear that?" I said, "Yeah." And that's the ghost door. After that, it was opening and slamming at this point. We're both so scared, and at the time it was about 1800 hour. And this ghost door was slamming so loud, Mossy ran into my room and we locked the door to my room, and this door was slamming so loud we thought it was going to break. Then the worst part was, as we hear running around the common room, and it was so scary. The slamming and running went on until about 2300 hour. I honestly thought this was the most horrific experience of my life. Then it all just stopped at like 2300 hour. It was quiet and we fell asleep. Come the Monday morning, all the boys came back and we were so creeped out by what we told them. And then before lunch we had room inspections, and as it was a training base, thousands of Australian soldiers gone through. The corporal doing our inspection lived in the building when he was doing his training. We told him that he said, "And I believe you guys, weird stuff used to happen all the time," so we decided to look up the history of the barracks and found out that it was an immigration site for people who lost their homes in the 50s after World War II and then fled to Australia. So, with 22 O's creepy. Banging on my window. It was the night before Stranger Things Season 2 came out. As a huge fan, I was super excited and decided to stay up the whole night to watch it all. I was half awake, half asleep watching YouTube when I started hearing a light banging noise on the downstairs window. Almost like a bird had flown into it and was flopping its wings against it. Now, keep in mind, I live in a heavily wooded area, so it's not uncommon to have animals around your house at night. So naturally, I just ignored it. Maybe it was just a bird. Probably 2-3 minutes later, I heard 3 sets of bangs, except it sounded more like a human doing it this time, so I tried to listen if I could hear anything such as talking or laughing of sorts. Well, I hear nothing at all, like absolutely nothing, so I kind of just ignored again. Time goes on, again 2 to 3 minutes later, more bangs, except this wasn't like a bang of a human, at least without tools, like it sounded like somebody banging a hammer against the side of my house. At this point, scared shitless, I'm thinking about calling the cops. I decide I'm just going to wait here, see if it happens one more time, and I will. This time it's at least 5 minutes before the next knock. Now these ones were just like the last one where it sounded like a hammer, except it was all around my house. It sounded as if there were 100 people banging on the one area at once, like the same speed, and then the bangs were happening like in human-like speeds. At that point, I decided to run to the kitchen, grab a knife, grab my dog, run up to my room, just lock the door. I calmed down for a second, and out of nowhere, my neighbor texts me, asking if I'm hearing banging. So at this point, I know I'm not dreaming. At this point, I decide to call 911 as my knocking is still happening. I'd say about a minute later, the knocking stops. Soon after, a few cops came and searched the entire house and the yard. Decent pit of the woods, too. They looked on the windows and signing for any sort of handprint or any sort of proof somebody was knocking. There's absolutely nothing. Now this is the part that really gets me. Like earlier that night it was raining, so the ground was quite muddy. They looked for any sort of shoe prints or animal prints, but absolutely nothing. Only prints were their own. Years later, about 2 weeks ago actually, I was walking through the woods grabbing my motion-activated camera to check the footage. It's about 7 p.m., so by no means is it dark, but it's starting to get a little bit. I'm a decent way into the woods at this point when I hear this god-awful, I don't even know what to call it. It was like wailing, but so goddamn loud it was like one, with almost like a few screeches afterwards. The screeches afterwards almost sounded like a person just screaming, but more high and more intense, like it was so goddamn loud and so terrible sounding. No human could make a noise like that. After that, I hopped on my ATV, gunned it home, not looking back. No joke, when I got home, I checked my phone, and that same neighbor asked if I'd heard the knocking, texted me if I was in the woods, asked if I'd heard some sort of screaming. I have absolutely zero idea what this thing is. Blue orb. Background. My dad's house is very new. We built it ourselves. At the time this took place, it was maybe a year old at that point. Our land, however, is old. We've seen ghosts there before. Lots of weird stuff happens. It's also a bit swampy in the woods. Goes from grassy fields to swampy woods pretty fast on the south end of our land. So that's the area that my window faces. So, on with the story. I was 10 or 11 laying in bed one night. My dad was going to be on a business trip. I was home alone with Mom. Well, being a 10-year-old, I didn't really like sleeping that much, but it was late, so I was trying at least. I look out my window above the forest and I see a floating blue orb. The logical part of my brain kicks in as my uncle spotlighting a raccoon. No, it's a blue ball, not a yellow or white light. What is this? I look at it for a minute before I run to go get my mom. She was up late reading a novel, so I pulled her back to my room and told her to look at the orb. It disappeared. She told me that it was my overactive imagination, tucked me into bed again, and I roll over dejected, still unable to sleep. I'm gonna guess about 10 minutes later. No clock, no phone. But I look outside again and the orb is back, but it's a little bit closer. It's hovering in front of the trees, a bit lower. It's not any brighter, just closer. So I run to go get my mom again, who's still awake. By the time she gets back to my room, it's gone again. It's happened a few more times, each time the orb getting closer. My mom had gotten very annoyed with me, told me not to bother her again after the 4th or 5th time. I'm lying in bed looking out the window, and it appears directly outside the glass, frozen in fear. What is it? What did it want? Was it going to hurt me, and why? It floated through my window into my room. It is an orb, but it's not completely illuminating my room. It's just a faint glow. It keeps floating closer to me until it's at the foot of my bed and I black out. I wake up sometime later, not sure exactly. The moon is still in the same general location, so not too long. Run to my window to see if the orb's still there, but instead I'm greeted with a flash of memory of some other time. A boy my age. Short, blonde hair, green eyes, a smile, a storm, darkness. Remember hitting the floor, and then I woke up the next morning. This isn't the first time I saw the boy. I'd seen him in a dream before, but I think I was a little girl. But I won't get into that here, since that was a dream and not a real encounter. The White Room. Near death. Abduction. This happened years ago when I was a kid. I was at my grandparents' house, the grandparents I didn't like, but they were babysitting me until maybe 3 o'clock. That's when my grandmother could pick me up. The way to their house was set up and you could kind of walk straight from the front door through the living room and the kitchen and the den area. That's where 2 back doors were. One led to the carport, one led literally directly into the woods. But I grew up in the country and spent a lot of time in the woods, so it really wasn't that weird. I had a really bad stomach ache. I had severe acid reflux as a kid, so again, pretty normal, but to deal with the pain, they put Coca-Cola in my sippy cup. Since it had been kind of a family tradition or something, to cure stomach pain with soda. I don't know their logic, they weren't exactly geniuses. Hot take, just so you know, soda used to be something that was more or less medicine before it was sugar juice. Anyhow, I remember walking down to the den to the back door that led into the woods. I stepped outside off the ramp, and there was a man, very well dressed, gray suit. Started talking to him, and I remember the woods starting to disappear and turn into a white room. It was really bizarre, but I was super calm for some reason. He asked me if I was ready to go. I didn't ask to where or why. I didn't really argue. I just said, no, I'm waiting for my mama. She picked me up at 3 o'clock and it's already 1, so I don't want to miss her. He just smiled. He nodded and remembered falling out of the room and hitting the ground. After that, I just know what my parents had told me. I was sent to children's hospitals because I started screaming about my stomach and throwing up. I had to get my stomach pumped and I was diagnosed with chronic gastritis and acid reflux. Since then, I haven't been able to drink anything carbonated just in case. This is the only strong memory I have of the man as of now, but I feel like I've seen him since then, but I'm not sure where or when. I'll keep you updated if I ever remember. He grabbed my ankle. This happened to me and my friend, whom I was texting while this happened. My friend refuses to talk about this incident and will straight up walk away if I mention it in front of her. And this still freaks me out, but I've experienced a lot of stuff, but this was by far one of my clearest and most intense experiences. I'm doing this on an app, so I apologize for any errors. I was 15 years old and there was some stuff I was going through. My parents are recently divorced, depression problems, but nothing truly awful, I guess. It was late and I was dealing with some pretty bad insomnia. I was texting my best friend, who I don't talk to anymore, partially because of this, I think, actually. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I remember looking over at the corner of my room and seeing a tall shadow, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. I freeze. I'm thinking to myself, okay, shadow, tree shadow. There's a tree outside. I slowly turn my head to look out the window. There's no way the tree can be casting this shadow. There's too much wind. I look back over at it, and it's a very still shadow. I text my friend. Lynn, there's something in my room and I'm very scared. I'm getting really bad feelings from it. Directly after I send the text, the shadow dissipates, like just kind of fades away, as does the feeling of dread. Lynn texts me back. There's something here too. Really tall shadow in the corner of my room. I'm freaking out. The bedroom had no windows. There's no way she could mistake it for a tree shadow. A few minutes after I got the text, I feel that sense of dread returning. There's a shadow again standing at the foot of my bed. It was way too dark to get a photo, and honestly wasn't thinking about pictures. I was terrified. My breathing gets super labored. I feel a panic attack coming on, and all of a sudden my phone battery drops from 80 to 0, dies. Panic attack comes on strong. I jump from my phone charger next to my bed. I plug my phone in looking for the shadow. It took my eyes off it for maybe a second, but it's gone. Phone comes back on, jumps right back to where it was before it died. Keep it plugged in, just in case. I text Lynn. Think it killed my phone battery. What the fuck? I'm scared. About 10 minutes later, she replies. It was standing next to my bed and it was all black. I'm so scared. Killed my phone battery too, but it's fine now. It's gone again though. So I start putting it together. It's a few minutes between jumps and it seems to be following the texts. I start texting anybody and everybody I can, just random bullshit. How are ya? Been a while. Are you okay? Maybe I can confuse it and stretch it out. Holy shit, was that a bad idea? My bed starts shaking violently. The headboard is banging on the wall, the blanket gets ripped off the bed, and I can see it standing tall at the foot of my bed. I have a fight or flight reaction. Jump off my bed toward my bedroom door and light switch. As I'm leaping over to the door, I feel a very, very cold hand touch my ankle, almost pulling me back toward my bed. I yank open my door and turn my light on at the same time, and it flickers for a moment, temporarily blinding me. The bulb shatters everywhere. I scream and run across the hall of my mom's room where I start sobbing. And she has the audacity to laugh at me. I'm freaking out, scared of the demon monster shadow in my room that blew my light bulb, and she laughs. I get angry and tell her I'm not sleeping in there tonight unless I get a new bulb. She promises to buy me a new bulb the next day, gives me to the mag light, and tells me to sleep in the living room. So I creep into the bedroom to grab my phone charger, run to the living room, and turn all the lights on. After a few days, I start sleeping in my bedroom again, but I had to get a light bulb and sleep with the flashlight for a long time. So yeah, Lynn refuses to talk about it. Nobody else experienced it. Nobody ever believed it. Still can't walk to my bed in the dark without feeling that hand on my ankle. Dogs chase cars. Apparently, so do hellhounds. So, timeline. This was around 2015. Not sure what month, but it was around 11 at night. I was driving from my dad's place to my mom's. I've said this a couple of times now, but my dad has a 75-acre of spooky-ass land where most of my stories take place. But anyway, I was driving. I just started down the long driveway when I felt like I was being watched. Not cool, but it happens more than often you'd believe. I'm near the highway when I see a dark shape at the edge of the woods. Oh well, probably a deer, so I shake it off. We have a ton of wildlife in the area, from deer to panthers to the occasional bear, and it starts chasing me. Keep in mind, please, that this shit is practically normal in my mind. I have tons of weird stuff that happens. It's not like it was just barreling at me, it just moved after my car, staying at the edge of the woods. So I keep my pace, turn onto the highway and speed up to 50 or so. I keep noticing something in my peripheral. I slow down and start looking for what it could be. A few yards behind me, I see this huge dog. And I grew up with larger dogs. My aunt had a St. Bernard mix growing up. I've had various large dogs, but this thing was literally the size of my car. I know I mentioned years before in bears, but bears don't chase cars, and we only have black bears, which are like the most docile kind. Okay, so now I'm freaking out. I gun it, releasing a long stream of curses and telling my car to get over it. It was a poorly kept 95 Honda Accord. I had had trouble with it dying on me, so anytime I had to push it, I made sure to speak kindly to it. I didn't care at this point. I was simply trying not to die. I seemingly can't shake it for too long. So in an act of bravery or stupidity, I pull over in a church parking lot, thinking maybe it's some sort of hell beast and it won't come into the light or into the church land. Holy shit, was I wrong. I stop and get my phone out to call my boyfriend, and in that span of time it catches up and jumps onto my car. I can see and feel and hear the metal popping and creaking. I see drool splatter onto my windshield. I scream, dropping my phone. Jumps off my car into the hood where I get a glimpse of it before it goes into the cemetery and disappears. A gated cemetery. It jumps the fence. It was definitely a dog, built like a Rottweiler pit mix, but darker and larger. The solid black with paws the size of dinner plates. Had a huge head almost the size of my car windows. I don't know why it decided to leave me alone, but it did, and I'm so thankful. Called my boyfriend crying, calmed me down and listened and told me that when I got home I should take pictures. And I did, or I tried at least. By the time I got to my mom's, the only thing left was a single dent in the roof of my car and some faint claw marks. They're more like indentations in the metal. Sorry guys, I don't have the pictures anymore. So that was my hellhound story, I guess. If you don't have the pictures of the thing, you need to provide the pictures of the roof or these claw marks. Dogs chase cars. Apparently, so do hellhounds. So, timeline. This was around 2015. Not sure what month, but it was around 11 at night. I was driving from my dad's place to my mom's. I've said this a couple of times now, but my dad has a 75-acre of spooky-ass land where most of my stories take place. But anyway, I was driving. I just started down the long driveway when I felt like I was being watched. Not cool, but it happens more than often you'd believe. I'm near the highway when I see a dark shape at the edge of the woods. Oh well, probably a deer, so I shake it off. We have a ton of wildlife in the area, from deer to panthers to the occasional bear, and it starts chasing me. Keep in mind, please, that this shit is practically normal in my mind. I have tons of weird stuff that happens. It's not like it was just barreling at me, it just moved after my car, staying at the edge of the woods. So I keep my pace, turn onto the highway and speed up to 50 or so. I keep noticing something in my peripheral. I slow down and start looking for what it could be. A few yards behind me, I see this huge dog. And I grew up with larger dogs. My aunt had a St. Bernard mix growing up. I've had various large dogs, but this thing was literally the size of my car. I know I mentioned years before in bears, but bears don't chase cars, and we only have black bears, which are like the most docile kind. Okay, so now I'm freaking out. I gun it, releasing a long stream of curses and telling my car to get over it. It was a poorly kept 95 Honda Accord. I had had trouble with it dying on me, so anytime I had to push it, I made sure to speak kindly to it. I didn't care at this point. I was simply trying not to die. I seemingly can't shake it for too long, so in an act of bravery or stupidity, I pull over in a church parking lot, thinking maybe it's some sort of hell beast and it won't come into the light or into the church land. Holy shit, was I wrong. I stop and get my phone out to call my boyfriend, and in that span of time it catches up and jumps onto my car. I can see and feel and hear the metal popping and creaking. I see drool splatter onto my windshield. I scream, dropping my phone. Jumps off my car into the hood where I get a glimpse of it before it goes into the cemetery and disappears. A gated cemetery. It jumps the fence. It was definitely a dog, built like a Rottweiler pit mix, but darker and larger. The solid black with paws the size of dinner plates. Had a huge head almost the size of my car windows. I don't know why it decided to leave me alone, but it did, and I'm so thankful. Called my boyfriend crying, calmed me down and listened and told me that when I got home I should take pictures. And I did, or I tried at least. By the time I got to my mom's, the only thing left was a single dent in the roof of my car and some faint claw marks. They're more like indentations in the metal. Sorry guys, I don't have the pictures anymore. So that was my hellhound story, I guess. If you don't have the pictures of the thing, you need to provide the pictures of the roof or these claw marks. Ghost Rave. So this happened to my dad, who's very skeptical of literally everything. He still can't explain this, though. Timeline, I'd say maybe 2015 or 16. So that would make me 16 or 17. Pretty recent. My dad had some anger issues, so one night after a fight with my stepmom, he left and went for a walk. We owned 75 acres or so we've owned this land for a good 30 years at least. No neighbors for quite some distance, and even then I'm from a small community. We're on a first-name basis with all of our neighbors for 5 miles or so. Most of them are my cousins somehow. So he went for a walk behind our house. We lived toward the back of the property, with woods surrounding us except for our neighbor's empty cow field. Moved the cows off to like a fixed fence. They'd moved for quite some time. As he got closer to the woods on the left of our house, he started hearing music. It was too faint to make out, but he was concerned that he had trespassers. So he kept walking toward it. He was very deep in the woods when he noticed it had moved west, so we jumped the fence into the pine forest. It was late spring or early summer, so not deer season. And not our land, but we know the owners, not a big deal. This went on for a while, and every time we got close to it, it moved to a different direction. We ended up walking about 4 miles, all the way across 4 different property lines of forest and field and onto a county road. His phone was dead, but my uncle was driving that road, so I stopped to give him a lift. This is one of the many times he's heard bizarre music and sounds coming from the woods. It comes from different sides, different volumes and styles. And no, none of our neighbors throw parties. And even if they did, we would know about it. Word travels in small communities like that. My sister's friend, George. My sister has a poltergeist that we call George. It's questionable if he's actually a poltergeist or just a spirit or something else, but he's been around for at least 10 years. Anyway, here's the stuff you can actually care about. His name is George. Kind of appeared when we built our new house. I assume due to family issues that created a negative enough energy that he was created or he was able to feed off of it enough to become more steady. I was the first one to notice him. Started with the house creaking and lights flickering in my room and glasses in the kitchen tinking together at night. It was just the house setting, that's what I told myself. It's just weird electrical issues, my dad told me. It's just your imagination, my mom told me. Yeah, okay, whatever. Started hearing actual footsteps at night and car doors slamming outside at weird hours. It's just the house settling. It's people going to the bathroom or getting water. It's just the neighbors and the way sound carries over the forests and fields. Bullshit, but okay. A few other experiences happened not surrounding George, and slowly, over time, more of my family started believing me. Kind of became a joke of sorts. Hey, where's my tape measure? I left it on the bar. George probably took it, and so whenever we lost something and found it in a weird place, it was George. There was one time he took a biscuit, which I guess could have been a child, but it's more fun to blame the ghost. Then it started getting more violent. If Dad was in a pissy mood, something would usually just come flying at his head. Some of the more notable occurrences happened in the kitchen. It's when he would be cooking, like pots and pans and cookie sheets would all come out of their assigned areas and smack him in the head. Which makes him more angry, but he usually leaves the house for a bit when that happens, but he always would blame George. He just blames whoever put the dishes up for not putting them up correctly. Doors started slamming. It's just the air conditioner, and furniture started moving around. Just the dogs pushing stuff when we're not home. And the glasses started shattering for no reason. Just cheap, thin glass, it happens. While the parents brushed off as normal occurrences and don't really think George is real, the kids know. A big thing happened one time. All the kids were in bed and their closet light was on, and we were all arguing on who's going to turn it off, because nobody wanted to get up. We'd see a pale arm come out of the closet, flick the light switch off, and needless to say, we didn't sleep much. For the longest time, I thought he was attached to because stuff always happened around me and I saw it the most. But after I moved out, I guess he attached himself to my little sister. So things have happened at both parents' houses, with the stuff described above and some mild stuff in my mom's house. House creaks, knocking, doorknobs rattling, windows banging, glasses breaking, weird electrical things, objects getting moved around. Never my mom's things, though. Mom actually refuses to believe George is real, despite being present for many of the occurrences. Over the years, George has kind of become part of my sister's daily routine. She communicates with them pretty regularly, usually by knocks on the wall. She leaves some food in her plate when she gets done to kind of offer it to him. She has a small area in her room that she sort of leaves open and cleans for him. When he gets loud at night, she tells him to be quiet and he listens. She rather enjoys his company most of the time. She doesn't feel so alone. And for ending purposes, I'll go ahead and answer some questions. No, I have no idea why we started calling him George, but that's just what he's always been. The pets we have don't really react to him. They seem to be pretty chill. And yes, we've had other experiences with entities, and we know it's different things because we know George's patterns and the way he feels when he's doing things. He only gets violent around people who are angry individuals. Seems to be more calm when around calmer individuals than my sister. My Ghost Therapy Dog. A light-hearted story. So when I was little, like 6, my family got a puppy we named Frank. Frank was intensely protective of my siblings and I. He was a smaller breed, and he once literally almost died saving my brother. Well, that was from some creep. So Frank was a very good boy. As I got older, I struggled with night terrors, PTSD, that's an unrelated incident, and severe anxiety. Frank was there for me through everything. He learned how to sense panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and he would stay by me and comfort me when he needed it. Frank slept in my room, and we had bad nightmares, and he would either lay back to back with me until I calmed down, or he would find a gentle way to try to wake me up. Frank lived to be an impressive 16 years old. He was beginning to lose his ability to walk when he had passed, but he insisted on sleeping in my bed, and he would crawl over to me when I needed it, so he could keep taking care of me. After Frank passed away, the nightmares came back worse than ever. Specifically, a lot of nightmares about losing him. I noticed I would still wake up mid-nightmare, oftentimes to the feeling of a warm presence pressed against my back, and a few times I was certain I heard Frank's quiet snoring. During the 6 months or so after he died, I learned how to cope better with the PTSD on my own. His presence slowly faded away. There were still a few instances of him protecting me, like hearing a phantom barking that stopped me from tripping down the stairs or feeling pushed out of the way when something could have fallen on me. All of these incidents happened at home. The last night I got to see Frank was in a dream. I was running from something when it cornered me. I remember being terrified, frozen in place when suddenly Frank came out of nowhere barking and running at the thread. I remember that bit very clearly, but he scared it off and then sat with me as I calmed down. I realized it was a dream and knew Frank had come back to me as my protector one last time. I haven't seen Frank since, but I know for a fact that he's up in doggy heaven, bossing angels around and watching out for me. Entity potentially following me. I've grown up with paranormal activity. Things falling off shelves, electronics turning on and off, whispers, animals freaking out over nothing, shadows, in some instances freakier than others, but mostly harmless stuff. It got to the point where something would happen and my family would just shrug and say it was the family ghost. There were a few things that did bother me. I always closed my closet doors every single night before bed, but by morning somehow they would always be open. Always freaked me out the most, and even into adulthood I get really anxious if my closet's open. Whenever a pet that was very close to us died, the activity would pick up, become more aggressive. During those times, I felt unsafe and uncomfortable in my old childhood home. I saw shadows more often, and the activity was much more frequent. Instead of the TV just turning on, for example, it would turn on to full blast volume in the middle of the night, waking everyone up. When I finally moved out, I noticed that the activity stopped. It wasn't so much easier to fall asleep, but I felt that weight gone. But it didn't last. After about 6 months, activity started again. Small things I brushed off, but after a while felt heavy, like something was watching, and every single night something would occur. My family mentioned not really noticing anything weird happening in their home anymore, but they felt like something was missing. It was such a huge part of their everyday life. It's been about 10 years of this now. I moved to a new place, and it's quiet for a couple months, and then pictures are flying off walls, and whispers start, and shadows are seen. My partner's only been with me for 2 years now, and is pretty super denier of all things paranormal, but we both heard something whisper his name one night. Does anybody have any idea what this could have been happening or potentially following me from place to place? I always thought entities could attach themselves to places, people, or things, but find it weird that when I move and it disappears for a month or 6, and then activity slowly picks up again. Escalates the longer I stay in one place. I've never felt unsafe other than when a pet member close to me in the household's passed away for a brief amount of time. Ouija experience. Not too long ago, my good friend, let's call him Jeff, used to live in this apartment complex right around the corner from me. We spent a good amount of time hanging out at his place. It was undoubtedly haunted by someone or something. There'd often be things that a place moved around or just simply pushed off whatever surface it was on. There was also this feeling of uneasiness and dread that sometimes lingered in the air. All that combined really made me want to get a Ouija board, talk to whatever spirit was there. Around the same time my great-grandmother was moving out of her house. She'd lived there for 20-something years, so we helped her clear out the place, and coincidentally enough, I came across a board. Casually took it with me. My mother and grandmother aren't quite fond of those things. Knowing about it, they wouldn't want to, well, I guess they would have just wanted to simply throw it out, but I wanted to keep it. It was dusty and old and obviously hadn't been played with in quite some time. So I bring the board to Jeff's house. We played with it. The first session, we just come into contact with a couple of spirits. It's pretty intriguing, but we called it a night, ended the session, and headed to bed. The next night, when he got out of work, we went back to his place again. Started another session. But something didn't feel right this time, though. Felt wrong and made my stomach queasy. I asked if anybody was present. It took about 20 minutes for a response. I moved to yes quickly, which I found odd because usually benevolent spirits are slower. But this planchette almost came out from under our fingers. Then we asked for a name, which sent chills to the inner core of my body. Repeatedly went from Z to U over and over again. Zuzu. Holy shit. Started freaking out and we demanded to say goodbye, but it wouldn't let us, making me panic even more than I already was. Then it started spinning. It was spinning in the figure of an infinity symbol before it spelled out run. Then it flew to goodbye and the board flipped itself over. It was exactly 3 a.m. when all that happened. Later that week, Jeff called a priest to his house and it was blessed. He said it had an extremely dark feeling to the house, or something of the sort. Shortly after that, we put the board away and haven't really played with it much. I do not blame you. See ya.